First contact, the arrival of the Zephyrians. The sleek, silver spacecraft of the Zephyrian Empire cut through the inky blackness of space, its hull gleaming under the light of distant stars. Inside, Commander Lyra stood tall and proud, her lithe form encased in form-fitting battle armor that accentuated her athletic build. Her piercing violet eyes scanned the bridge, where her all-female crew worked with silent efficiency. "Report," Lyra commanded, her voice crisp and authoritative. Lieutenant Vex, her second-in-command, stepped forward. "We've entered the Sol system, Commander. The third planet, designated Earth, is now within range of our long-range scanners." A holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the bridge, displaying a blue and green orb suspended in space. Lyra's lip curled in disdain as she studied the image. "This is the planet our long-range probes detected. It seems unremarkable." "Indeed, Commander," Vex agreed. "Initial scans show a pre-spacefaring civilization. Their technology appears to be centuries behind our own." Lyra circled the hologram, her sharp mind already formulating plans. The Zephyrian Empire had been expanding rapidly, conquering world after world, but resources were becoming scarce, and new colonies were needed to sustain their burgeoning population. "What of its defenses?" Lyra inquired. "Minimal, Commander. They possess nuclear capabilities, but nothing that could pose a threat to our fleet. Their space presence is limited to a handful of primitive satellites and a small orbital station." A predatory smile played across Lyra's lips. "Excellent. This world will make an easy conquest for the Empire. Prepare a detailed scan of the planet's surface. I want to identify key strategic locations before we—" Her words were cut short as the ship suddenly lurched violently. Warning klaxons blared throughout the bridge as the lighting shifted to an ominous red. "Status report," Lyra barked, bracing herself against a console. Vex's fingers flew over her control panel. "Unknown energy surge, Commander. It's interfering with our systems." The ship shuddered again, more violently this time. Sparks erupted from several consoles as the crew fought to maintain control. "Engines are offline," another officer shouted. "We're being pulled into the planet's gravity well." Lyra's mind raced. This was impossible. No primitive world should have the capability to disable their advanced technology. "Reroute all power to the emergency thrusters. We need to stabilize our descent." The next few minutes were chaos as the Zephyrian vessel plummeted through Earth's atmosphere. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't regain control. The last thing Lyra saw before impact was the rapidly approaching ground, a patchwork of green fields and forests. When Lyra regained consciousness, the acrid smell of smoke filled her nostrils. She pushed herself up, wincing at the pain that lanced through her body. Around her, the bridge was in ruins. Sparking wires hung from the ceiling, and the once pristine consoles were now twisted hunks of metal. "Sound off," she called out, her voice hoarse. One by one, her crew responded. They were battered and bruised, but alive. As Lyra helped Vex to her feet, she took stock of their situation. They were stranded on an alien world, their ship disabled, with no way to contact the Empire for aid. It was a scenario she had never anticipated. The mighty Zephyrian warriors brought low by some inexplicable phenomenon. "Commander," Vex said, her voice tinged with worry. "What are your orders?" Lyra steeled herself, pushing down the fear and uncertainty that threatened to overwhelm her. She was a Zephyrian warrior, trained to face any challenge. This world may have surprised them, but she refused to be defeated. "We salvage what we can from the ship," she declared. "Set up a defensive perimeter and assess our supplies. We need to repair our communication systems and contact the Empire before—" She was interrupted by a gasp from one of her officers. "Commander, look." Lyra turned to see what had caught the officer's attention. Through a gash in the ship's hull, she could see movement in the nearby tree line. Figures were emerging, bipedal, similar in shape to Zephyrians, but clearly alien. Humans, Vex whispered, a mix of curiosity and apprehension in her voice. Lyra's hand instinctively went to her weapon. These primitives might see them as easy targets in their weakened state, but as the humans drew closer, she noticed something unexpected. There was no aggression in their approach, no weapons raised. Instead, their faces showed a mix of awe, concern, and, was that compassion? A tall, broad-shouldered male stepped forward from the group. His deep voice called out words that Lyra couldn't understand, but the tone was gentle, almost soothing. He held his hands out, palms up, in what seemed to be a universal gesture of peace. For a moment, Lyra hesitated. Everything she knew about conquest and the inferiority of other species warred with the reality before her. These humans, these supposed primitives, were offering help to beings who had come to conquer them. "Commander," Vex prompted, awaiting orders. Lyra made a decision that would change the course of both Zephyrian and human history. "Lower your weapons," she commanded her crew. Then, turning to the human male, she took a tentative step forward. "I am Commander Lyra of the Zephyrian Empire," she said, activating her universal translator. We require assistance." The human's eyes widened at her words, but then his face broke into a warm smile. "I'm Jake," he replied, his words now understandable through the translator. "Jake Cooper. And don't worry, we're here to help." As Jake and the other humans approached, Lyra felt a strange mix of emotions: relief at the offer of aid, confusion at their willingness to help, and a gnawing feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, she and her people had severely underestimated this world and its inhabitants. Little did Lyra know that this unexpected encounter would be the beginning of an adventure that would challenge everything she thought she knew about strength, civilization, and the true meaning of advancement. The Zephyrians had come to conquer Earth, but they were about to discover that humanity had much to teach them. Stranded among the primitives. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, as Jake Cooper led the group of alien women towards his farm. Commander Lyra walked beside him, her posture rigid and eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The rest of her crew followed, supporting each other and carrying what salvageable equipment they could from their crashed ship. "It's not much," Jake said, gesturing to the weathered farmhouse and large barn that came into view, "but it's home. And more importantly, it's isolated. You'll be safe here while we figure out what to do next." Lyra nodded curtly, still wary of their situation. "Your assistance is appreciated," she said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "But do not mistake this for surrender. We are warriors of the Zephyrian Empire, and we will find a way to return to our people." Jake raised an eyebrow, but chose not to comment on her bravado. Instead, he focused on the practical. "Let's get you all settled in the barn for now. It's spacious and should give you privacy. Plus, it'll be easier to hide any of your tech from prying eyes." As they approached the barn, Vex sidled up to Lyra. "Commander," she whispered, "are you certain this is wise? Trusting these primitives?" Lyra's jaw clenched. "We have little choice, Lieutenant. Until we can repair our communications array, we must rely on their hospitality. But remain vigilant. This could all be an elaborate trap." Jake pushed open the large barn doors, revealing a cavernous space filled with farm equipment and bales of hay. "It's not exactly 5-star accommodations," he said with a sheepish grin, "but it's dry and warm. We can set up some partitions for privacy." As the Zephyrians filed into the barn, Jake noticed their looks of confusion and disdain at the rustic surroundings. He couldn't help but chuckle. "I guess this is all pretty low-tech compared to what you're used to, Lyra ran a hand over a rusted tractor, her nose wrinkling slightly. "Your observation is correct. Your level of technology is rudimentary." Jake's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Well, it may be rudimentary, but it gets the job done. Speaking of which, why don't you show me what needs fixing on your ship? I'm pretty handy with engines and electronics. Might be able to help." Lyra exchanged glances with Vex, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, she nodded. Very well. But understand that our technology is far beyond anything you've encountered. I doubt you'll be of much use. As they walked back to the crash site, Jake listened intently as Lyra explained their ship's systems. Despite the complexity, he found himself growing excited by the challenge. You know, he said, interrupting Lyra's technical jargon, some of this isn't too different from the systems we use, just more advanced. I think I might be able to jury-rig some of our tech to interface with yours. Lyra looked at him skeptically. You believe you can integrate your primitive technology with our advanced systems? Jake shrugged. Won't know until we try. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones. Over the next few days, a routine began to develop. Jake worked tirelessly alongside the Zephyrians, his ingenuity and resourcefulness surprising even the skeptical Lyra. He managed to adapt some of his farm equipment to power their communication array, and his knowledge of Earth's satellites proved invaluable in their attempts to boost their signal. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake found Lyra standing alone outside the barn, her gaze fixed on the stars above. Homesick? He asked, moving to stand beside her. Lyra didn't look at him, but her posture softened slightly. I was contemplating the vastness of space, she said softly. How small and insignificant your world seemed from up there. And yet, Jake prompted when she fell silent. And yet in the short time we've been here, I've seen displays of ingenuity and adaptability that rival some of our greatest scientific minds. She turned to face him, her expression a mix of confusion and grudging respect. How is it that a species so technologically behind can be so resourceful? Jake smiled. Maybe because we've had to be. We don't have the advanced tech you do, so we had to make do with what we have. It's made us pretty good at thinking outside the box. Lyra pondered his words, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. But before she could respond, Vex came running from the barn, her face etched with excitement. Commander, she called. We've done it. We've established contact with the Empire. Lyra's eyes widened, a mixture of relief and something akin to disappointment flashing across her face. She quickly composed herself, straightening her posture. Excellent work, Lieutenant. Inform them of our situation and request immediate extraction. As Vex hurried back to the barn, Lyra turned to Jake. Her usual authoritative demeanor seemed to falter for a moment. We are in your debt, Jake Cooper. When our people arrive, I will ensure that your assistance is recognized. Jake's smile faded slightly. So I guess this is goodbye then. Lyra opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time in her life, the confident commander found herself at a loss. Inside the barn, Vex's excited voice suddenly turned to one of confusion and alarm. Commander, you need to hear this. Lyra and Jake exchanged a look before rushing into the barn. The makeshift communication array was alive with static and broken transmissions. Vex's face was pale as she turned to her commander. It's not just our ship, she said, her voice trembling. Something is wrong. Very wrong. The entire Zephyrian fleet. They're under attack. As the gravity of the situation sank in, Lyra realized that their stay on Earth might be far from over. And as she glanced at Jake, seeing the determination in his eyes, she understood that the alliance between their species had only just begun. The Zephyrians had come to Earth believing it to be an easy conquest. Now, they found themselves dependent on the very primitives they had dismissed. As the transmissions continued to stream in, painting a picture of chaos and destruction in space, Lyra knew that the true test of both their species was yet to come. Shattered preconceptions. The barn buzzed with frantic activity as the Zephyrians huddled around their makeshift communication array. Static-filled transmissions painted a grim picture. The mighty Zephyrian fleet, pride of their empire, was under assault by an unknown force. Commander Lyra's face was a mask of stoic determination, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes. Lieutenant Vex, report. she ordered, her voice taut with tension. Vex's fingers danced over the jerry-rigged controls, a blend of advanced Zephyrian tech and Earth components. It's chaos, Commander. Our fleet is scattered across 3 star systems. Communications are sporadic, but reports indicate an enemy of unprecedented power. Jake stepped forward, his brow furrowed in concern. Is there anything we can do to help? Lyra turned to him, ready to dismiss his offer, but paused. Over the past weeks, this human had consistently surprised her with his ingenuity. Perhaps, she said slowly, our primary challenge is the communication array. If we could boost its power, we might be able to coordinate a response. Jake nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. I think I might have an idea. Give me a few hours. As Jake left the barn, Vex approached Lyra. Commander, with all due respect, are we truly going to rely on a primitive's assistance in this crisis? Lyra's eyes followed Jake's retreating form. That primitive has shown more resourcefulness than many of our own engineers, Lieutenant. We'd be fools to dismiss his aid now. Hours passed, and the situation in space grew more dire. The Zephyrians worked tirelessly, analyzing the fragmented data they received, trying to piece together a strategy. Suddenly, the barn doors burst open, and Jake entered, grinning despite his disheveled appearance. I think I've got it, he announced, holding up what looked like a cobbled-together mess of Earth electronics and Zephyrian components. It's not pretty, but it should amplify your signal by a factor of 10. Lyra eyed the device skeptically. How did you manage this? Jake's eyes twinkled with excitement. I repurposed some old satellite dishes and combined them with parts from your communication array. The tricky part was interfacing our tech with yours. But once I figured out the basic principles, it wasn't too different from boosting a tractor engine. As Jake began to install this creation, Lyra watched in amazement. His hands moved with confidence, seamlessly blending 2 vastly different technologies. Within minutes, the static-filled transmissions cleared, revealing a flood of clear communication channels. Vex's eyes widened in disbelief. It's working. We're receiving transmissions from across the fleet. The barn erupted in cheers, the Zephyrian warriors momentarily forgetting their usual stoic demeanor. Lyra found herself smiling, genuinely impressed by Jake's achievement. As the day wore on, the true scale of the crisis became apparent. The unknown enemy had technology that rivaled, and in some ways surpassed, that of the Zephyrians. The Empire's usual tactics of overwhelming force were failing against this new threat. During a lull in the communications, Jake approached Lyra. I couldn't help overhearing, he said hesitantly. It sounds like your usual strategies aren't working. Lyra nodded grimly. Our fleet is designed for swift, decisive victories. We've never encountered an enemy that could match our technological superiority. Jake rubbed his chin thoughtfully. You know, sometimes the most effective solution isn't the most advanced one. In farming, we often have to come up with creative solutions to problems we can't overpower. Lyra raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. What are you suggesting? Well, Jake began, warming to his topic. Instead of trying to outgun them, why not outsmart them? Use the environment to your advantage. Set traps. Create diversions. Sometimes a well-placed rock can do more damage than the fanciest laser. As Jake outlined his ideas, Lyra found herself listening with growing interest. His strategies were unorthodox by Zephyrian standards, but they held a certain brilliance in their simplicity. These are intriguing concepts, Lyra admitted, but how can we implement them across an entire fleet? Jake grinned. That's where your fancy tech comes in. We'll use the boosted communications to spread these ideas across your forces. It'll be like a galaxy-wide game of chess. Over the next few days, the barn became a hive of activity. Jake's strategies, refined and adapted by Zephyrian tactical knowledge, were transmitted across the fleet. Reports began to trickle in of successful engagements, of enemy ships lured into asteroid fields or tricked by holographic decoys. As Lyra coordinated the efforts from Earth, she found herself constantly amazed by Jake's creativity. He approached each problem with a fresh perspective, unbound by the rigid thinking that had defined Zephyrian military doctrine for centuries. One evening, as they took a brief respite from their work, Lyra turned to Jake. "I owe you an apology," she said softly. Jake looked at her, surprised. "For what?" "When we first arrived, I dismissed your people as primitive, unworthy of our attention, except as a potential conquest." Lyra's voice was tinged with regret. "I see now how wrong I was. Your species may not have our technological advancements, but your adaptability, your creativity, these are strengths we have forgotten to value." Jake smiled warmly. "We all have something to learn from each other. That's the beauty of it." As they stood there, the stars twinkling above them, Lyra felt a shift in her worldview. The mighty Zephyrian Empire, with all its advanced technology, was being saved by the ingenuity of a species they had once deemed insignificant. But even as this realization sank in, a new transmission crackled through the air, its urgency cutting through the moment of peace. The unknown enemy had changed tactics, and a significant portion of their fleet was now on a direct course for Earth. Lyra's eyes met Jake's, a silent understanding passing between them. The true test was yet to come, and the fate of both their worlds now hung in the balance. The Zephyrians had come to Earth as conquerors, but now found themselves its defenders, standing side by side with the very humans they had once underestimated. The looming threat. The barn, once a simple structure for housing farm equipment, had transformed into a bustling command center. Zephyrian warriors worked alongside human volunteers, their combined efforts focused on a single urgent goal: preparing Earth for the impending alien invasion. Commander Lyra stood at the center of this organized chaos, her violet eyes fixed on a holographic display of Earth's solar system. A swarm of red dots, representing the unknown enemy fleet, inched closer to the blue orb that was their current home. "They'll be within striking distance in less than 48 hours, Vex reported, her usual confidence tinged with worry. Jake, who had been poring over schematics with a group of Zephyrian engineers, looked up. "That doesn't give us much time to prepare Earth's defenses." Lyra nodded grimly. "And we're vastly outgunned. Even if we could get every nation on this planet to cooperate, your current technology is no match for this threat." A tense silence fell over the group. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on everyone present. They were facing an enemy that had managed to decimate the mighty Zephyrian fleet. Earth, with its comparatively primitive defenses, seemed like an easy target. Suddenly, Jake's eyes lit up with an idea. "Wait a minute. What if we don't try to match their technology? What if we use Earth itself as our defense?" Lyra turned to him, intrigued. "Explain." Jake grabbed a nearby tablet, quickly sketching out his thoughts. "Look, Earth has something unique, a diverse range of environments and natural phenomena. Deserts, oceans, polar ice caps, volcanoes, electromagnetic fields. What if we could turn these into weapons or shields?" The Zephyrians gathered around. Their interest peaked. Jake continued, his excitement growing. "We could use the planet's magnetic field to disrupt their sensors, lure their ships into the upper atmosphere, and use the friction to damage their hulls. Hell, we might even be able to weaponize weather patterns." Vex looked skeptical. "This sounds like primitive trickery, not a proper military strategy." But Lyra was nodding slowly, a smile spreading across her face. "No, Lieutenant. This is exactly the kind of unconventional thinking that has kept us alive so far." "Jake, elaborate on this plan. I want every detail." As Jake outlined his strategy, the energy in the room shifted from despair to cautious hope. Zephyrian warriors began offering suggestions, their advanced knowledge of physics and technology meshing with Jake's understanding of Earth's unique features. Over the next 24 hours, a plan took shape. Lyra used the communication array to contact sympathetic factions within the Zephyrian fleet, coordinating a multi-pronged defense. Earth's governments were brought into the loop, their militaries and scientific communities mobilized in an unprecedented global cooperation. As the deadline approached, Lyra found Jake outside the barn, staring up at the night sky. She moved to stand beside him, following his gaze to the stars above. "Funny," Jake said softly. "I used to look up there and dream about what might be out there. Never imagined I'd be helping to defend Earth from an alien invasion." Lyra felt a surge of emotion she couldn't quite name. "Jake," she said, her voice uncharacteristically gentle, "I want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, your actions have earned you the respect of the Zephyrian Empire. You've shown us a kind of strength we had forgotten existed." Jake turned to her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "It's not just me, Lyra. It's all of us working together. That's the real strength." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of tomorrow's battle heavy between them. Then, surprising both herself and Jake, Lyra reached out and took his hand. "We should rest," she said. "Tomorrow will test us all." As they walked back to the barn, a streak of light crossed the sky, the first of the enemy ships entering Earth's atmosphere. The battle for Earth was about to begin, and with it, a new chapter in the relationship between humans and Zephyrians. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, belying the tension that hung in the air. The barn was a flurry of activity as final preparations were made. Lyra stood before her crew and the assembled human volunteers, her posture radiating confidence despite the odds they faced. "Today, we face an enemy that threatens not just Earth, but the entire galaxy," she began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "They believe us weak and divided, but they will find us united and strong. Zephyrian and human, advanced technology, and innovative spirit, together, we are a force they cannot hope to overcome." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the faces before her. "Remember your training, trust in each other, and know that today, we fight not just for survival, but for a future where our peoples stand together as equals." A cheer went up from the assembled group, a roar of defiance against the looming threat. As they dispersed to their assigned posts, Lyra caught Jake's eye. No words were needed. The look they shared spoke volumes. Whatever the outcome, they would face it together. As the first enemy ships breached Earth's upper atmosphere, Lyra squared her shoulders and strode towards the command center. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and she was determined to see them both survive. The battle for Earth had begun, and with it, the true test of the unlikely alliance between the Zephyrian warriors and the humans they had once underestimated. The next few hours would determine not just the fate of a planet, but the future of interstellar relations for generations to come. A new understanding. The sky above Earth blazed with the fury of interstellar warfare. Enemy ships, sleek and deadly, streaked through the atmosphere, their weapons leaving trails of destruction in their wake. But they were met with a resistance unlike anything they had encountered before. From her makeshift command center in Jake's barn, Commander Lyra coordinated a defense that defied conventional tactics. Earth's magnetic field, supercharged by Zephyrian technology, created a shield that confounded enemy sensors. Massive storm systems, guided by weather control satellites, battered alien ships with hurricane-force winds and lightning strikes. "Quadrant 7 is holding," Vex called out, her eyes fixed on a holographic display. "The Amazon defense grid is online." Jake grinned as he worked furiously at a jury-rigged console. "Told you those trees would make great camouflage for our pulse cannons." Lyra allowed herself a small smile. The humans' unorthodox strategies were proving devastatingly effective, but the battle was far from over. "Commander," a young Zephyrian warrior called out in alarm, "a group of enemy ships has broken through. They're heading for the polar ice caps." Lyra's mind raced. If the enemy melted the ice caps, it would devastate Earth's ecosystems and flood coastal cities. They needed a solution. Fast. "Jake," she turned to him, "you mentioned something about weaponizing the ice." Jake's eyes lit up. "Yes, if we can trigger controlled ice shelf collapses, we could create massive tidal waves. It might damage some coastal areas, but it would take out their ships. Lyra nodded decisively. Do it. Vex, coordinate with Earth's navies. We need to evacuate any populated areas in the danger zone. As Jake set to work, Lyra couldn't help but marvel at the seamless cooperation between humans and Zephyrians. Barriers of technology and culture had melted away in the face of a common threat. Hours passed in a blur of tense moments and hard-fought victories. The enemy, for all their advanced technology, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Earth's diverse environments, coupled with Zephyrian ingenuity and human creativity, proved to be an unbeatable combination. As the sun began to set, a cheer went up from the command center. The last of the enemy ships was retreating, limping back into space. We did it," Vex said, disbelief and joy mingling in her voice. Lyra stood in stunned silence for a moment, then turned to Jake. Without a word, she pulled him into a fierce embrace. "Thank you," she whispered, her usual stoic demeanor cracking. Jake returned the hug, his voice thick with emotion. "We all did this, together." In the days that followed, as the dust of battle settled, a new era dawned for both Earth and the Zephyrian Empire. The threat had been neutralized, not just around Earth, but across the galaxy. The unconventional tactics developed on this primitive world had turned the tide of the entire war. A week after the battle, Lyra stood with Jake on a hill overlooking his farm. The barn, still bearing the marks of its time as an interstellar command center, stood as a testament to their unlikely alliance. "The High Council has been in contact," Lyra said, breaking the comfortable silence. "They're reconsidering many of our long-held beliefs about expansion and conquest." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what do you think about that?" Lyra turned to him, her violet eyes soft with newfound wisdom. "I think it's long overdue. This experience has taught us that true strength doesn't come from technological superiority or military might. It comes from diversity, adaptability, and cooperation." She gestured to the sprawling countryside before them. "Your world, which we once dismissed as primitive, held the key to saving not just Earth, but our entire empire. We came here as conquerors and found ourselves humbled." Jake nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "So, what happens now?" "Now," Lyra said, her voice filled with determination, "we build a new future. The High Council is proposing an alliance with Earth, not as rulers, but as equals. There's so much we can learn from each other." Jake's smile widened. "I like the sound of that, though I have to admit, I'm going to miss having a barn full of alien warriors." Lyra laughed, a sound that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. "Well, I was thinking of staying on as an ambassador. Someone needs to make sure this alliance starts off on the right foot." As they stood there, watching the sun set on a world forever changed, Lyra reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The Zephyrians had come to Earth seeking conquest, believing themselves superior in every way. Instead, they had found partners, teachers, and friends. The stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, no longer distant points of light, but beacons of possibility. Humanity was taking its first steps into a larger universe, and the Zephyrians were rediscovering the values they had lost in their quest for dominance. As Lyra's hand found Jake's, she realized that this was more than just an alliance between worlds. It was the beginning of a new understanding, a recognition that true strength lies not in uniformity, but in the beautiful, chaotic diversity of life across the cosmos. The story of the Zephyrians and humans was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. And as they stood together on that hilltop, Lyra and Jake knew that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them not as conquerors and conquered, but as equals united in their shared humanity. The universe, vast and full of wonders, awaited their exploration, and they would face it together, stronger for the lessons they had learned and the bonds they had forged in the crucible of adversity.